So in this segment, we're going to be talking about how Brexit, the pollution and the pandemic killed the Great British shellfish industry. Now, before reading this article, I didn't actually realise how bad the pollution problem was in the UK. I thought it was more recent that we saw a lot more raw sewage being dumped into waterways, because I read stories about how Britain's waterways were improving over the last couple of decades. But evidently, I was wrong. And I don't know if it was bad under New Labour, but it sounds like under the Tories consistently the waterways have been an issue in terms of cleanliness. So we're going to go through the article. You got Derek West, someone who's a shell fisherman, can still remember the time. He's 93. About when they picked fish and all this stuff. When they had their specific kind of badges on their jumpers, so they could be identified if they had ever tragically drowned. So that stuff is. You can pause it here if you want to read all of this stuff. It's more kind of fluff piece for the article, I guess. I'm kind of trying to paint the picture of how it was back then in 19 Jiggity Jive. He says, "When I was a boy, there was plenty of fish about," says Derek. "There weren't all these restrictions. You just caught it, brought it to shore and sold it. Now you mustn't bring so much of this in, so much of that in, and all that business. It's so different today," which makes sense, because if you guys kept bringing in so much, there wouldn't be much left in for future generations, because the fish will be extinct, or at least on the endangered list, and then it's extinct. A British institution at risk. The West have been fishing in Whitstable for 150 years. Graham, 59, has 4 children, but says the family business will end with him, which is sad. I think it's sad. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but a family business ending, one that's lasted for 150 years is sad to me anyways. Being an oysterman on the south coast of England isn't what it used to be. There's nothing in it for the young'uns anymore, says Graham. It's not steady enough. It's feast or famine, so you're either really lucky or you're really unlucky. The British shellfish industry is worth around £12 million a year, which isn't, it's not going to make a dent in the GDP, but for local economies, that's a lot of money. And that's one of the things where they didn't talk about in the Brexit, it's one of the things I think Remainers didn't take into account, I think, when we talked about how fishing is only a small percent of GDP, which is very true, but for some local communities, it's all they have. Factory towns, all they have is really the factory. Fishing towns, all they really have is fishing. And of course, they've lost it through Brexit, but maybe that's something we need to acknowledge next time out. So, but for families and communities, the industry support its survival is vital. For some time now, the industry has been on a steady downward spiral, and that was predating Brexit. But now, because of Brexit, it's gotten a lot worse, because these guys and gals have lost their biggest export market. A post-Brexit world has proven to be a difficult place for shell fishermen. EU red tape in the immediate wake of Brexit. I mean, it's not EU red tape though, is it? This is what happens when you're a third country, which I think this article does mention later on. It does acknowledge it, but we're a third country now, and this is the rules around third countries, which we actually helped to create around shellfish, because we didn't want third countries to be competitive with shellfish, given that it's a decent export for the UK. As British exporters got stuck with lorries full of live shellfish, only to be turned away if a form was filled out in the wrong colour pen, which I don't think even happened. I think that's a red herring. I've read one story about that happening, but even then, surely if you're exporting stuff, you make sure everything's correct, because when you write stuff with certain colours, there can be scanning issues. So it could be the case that they asked for a black pen for specific reasons. So again, this is the Telegraph being pedantic here. There may be a reason for it, there may not be, but when you're exporting to another country, you play by their rules, not your own. One company sent £15,000 worth of scallops to the border in January 2021 and got delayed due to paperwork errors. And again, that'd be down to maybe the customs agent or maybe the actual fishing company that may have done it wrong. By the time they arrived in France, the scallops had gone off, so you can't sell them. The turnaround times on these sorts of fish is really short. For live fish, they don't keep long, and that's why you needed something like the single market, so that goods can travel fairly easily. And the simple fact is they can't because of Brexit. So big Brexit win there. In the year since, exporters have been trying to fathom the new regulations after Brussels ruled they could no longer bring live mussels, oysters, scallops, clams and cockles into the EU from what they called Category B waters unless they were purified. Now, again, these aren't new regulations. These were existing regulations, which I think have been there since about 2007. Or 2011, I can't remember which one. We've gone through it previously on the channel, but these have existed long before Brexit. So to argue these are new regulations is just a joke. These are for third countries. Before we could take the scallops and the shellfish to the EU and they could be purified there, but that kind of access isn't allowed for third countries, which is fair enough. If those are the EU rules, those are the rules. When you help set up the rules, you have even less remit to complain. The UK shellfish is considered category B. The categorization relates to the number of E. coli found in samples of the shellfish. With Cat B, no samples is permitted to exceed 46,000 E. coli per 100 grams, and has to be purified before it can be consumed. And the issue is that once they're purified, they don't last long, so they have to be consumed fairly quickly, I think, within probably a day or two at the most. And the simple fact is they can't be purified here because of all the delays at the border. So we can't purify them over there because that privilege doesn't exist for third countries. So these are huge problems. Clean seawater is flushed through the shellfish in a controlled tank for 42 hours. The fishermen say purifying in the UK is vastly expensive and impractical. Even a small purification plant costs £100,000, and yet, France, Spain, Italy, for example, I think Italy do consume shellfish, or a decent amount of it, I believe. They can afford these things because they consume more shellfish over there. So what does that mean? They have the purification plants because there's a demand there. In the UK, there's not so much of a demand. I also remember reading a story that some people got sick after eating some shellfish because I don't think they were purified or weren't purified properly at all. And you can see why the EU have these rules, because the UK has a lot of category B and C water, which is full of bacteria because of dumping of raw sewage amongst other things. And so they're not safe to eat, and they can't monitor third countries. So you have a rule where if you're a third country, it's got to be purified before you can sell it, which is fair enough. Do I think that's a good rule? Probably not, but again, there's probably good reasons behind it. Because otherwise, why would the UK set it up in the first place, right? Unless it's just to keep out competitors. The process means the shellfish lose their freshness faster. By the time they're on lorries headed for the continent, their shelf life has begun to diminish, and so with fresh produce, the more they diminish, the less they're worth, and fresh produce is worth more than frozen. Before Brexit, British fishermen had always exported unpurified shellfish, but as a third country, they are now subject to new rules. And again, you got the third country bit right, but the new rules bit is wrong. Third countries have been subjected to this for almost a decade now, depending on when the rules were fully implemented. I think it was 2007, and they did some tweaks in 2011. That's what my memory tells me. Overnight, their entire business models were put at risk, and the irony is that the majority of fishermen voted for Brexit, so they voted for this, really, according to the Tories. The Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs hadn't, by all accounts, put much in place to support them. And this is where I get annoyed with the government, because the government keeps saying, it's the EU's fault, and then they also say people need to take more advantage of Brexit. Well, these people are trying to take advantage of exporting, to a nearby country, and they can't do it because of all the checks, because of, Brexit, and because there's no real support out there for them in order to help them with exports. Nor, for that matter, did they seem to understand how the British shellfish industry worked. And, why would a bunch of people with arts degrees, right? Because that's who I think a lot of the Tory ministers are. A lot of them don't have degrees in much else, right? Why would they understand the shellfish industry when they, A, have arts degrees, and B, refuse to actually listen to experts? How the hell are they going to learn anything about, specialised industries when they don't listen to anyone apart from spin doctors and pollsters? That's it. And also racists. Why would they care about how the fishing industry works? You were duped. You voted for Brexit. You voted for the Tories twice, or at least once in 2019, potentially again in 2017. You kind of brought this on yourselves, guys. It's estimated a tenth of Britain's restaurants were lost during the pandemic in 2020, which is again tragic. The UK's pubs, bars and restaurants and hotels lost nearly £200 million a day in sales. For the suppliers that relied on their business, it was just devastating, for them to just sell these shellfish to these restaurants and bars, etc. They lost a lot of money out. But the problem was that a lot of the purification centres were in the EU for these fish. So the UK doesn't have a lot of purification centres. So even if they could sell directly to these food places, the issue is that without them being purified, they're a health risk. So they would struggle to still sell them to markets in the UK. Also, they probably would pay less as well. Then there are the waters themselves, which in some parts of the country seem to be killing our seafood. Crabs and lobsters have been washing up dead along the northeast coast, which shows you there's a huge problem. The Byline Times covered it last year. There were, I kind of reacted to their video where they talked about the huge problems with the pollution. They did some checks on the ocean water and it's really bad. You got surfers being sick, and there were signs up saying don't go swimming because of all the bacteria in the water. Fishermen say pollution is to blame, while DEFRA says a natural algal bloom is the most likely cause. It's a extra kind of growing of algae. But again, why is this happening suddenly? What's going on? We don't know if we can go about this much longer, said Adrian Noble, a Whitby lobster fisherman. There are a few fishermen having to go to food banks now, which again is tragic. Like people who, especially fishermen, jobs are dangerous. No one should be in a position where they have to go to a food bank in the country now to make it out like, oh, their lives are so bad they have to go to food banks now because of all this stuff. Is like, regardless of that, like no one should have to go to a food bank in a developed country, which the UK is. At least it feels like it, anyways. So it's another Tory failure, really. In Whitstable, polluted waters are threatening to bring an end to the centuries-old oyster industry that draws 30,000 people every summer for the Oyster Festival, which, why the hell would you go to an oyster festival? That's so weird. The little town has been famed for oysters since the Roman times, which is a long time. Now if you hop on a train from St Pancras for lunch in Whitstable, you're as likely to find yourself tucking into a plate of oysters from Jersey or Ireland as the town they're from itself, which shows you like even though like you think they would have more access to selling to the locals, there are problems, and I think it's down to the lack of purification centres. If you can't sell the fish to the local people, there's evidently there's some sort of issue there. And Jersey, maybe they go to the EU to get it purified, then come back through to give the stuff to Whitstable. I'm not sure how Jersey are getting around it. Same with Ireland. I'm still not sure if the UK if GB are checking goods from Ireland. So maybe that's how Ireland are kind of getting around it. And this is the kicker for me, because this is where I thought the UK was doing okay with the waterways. Things were becoming clearer. But in 2013, the pollution in the sea around Whitstable got so bad, Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall had to be served Irish shellfish. The horror. But point being is like, the pollution was so bad that they couldn't actually farm the fish in those waters, which this person talks about here, which shows you like even before Brexit we had huge problems around the waterways. It wasn't just these companies being allowed to dump raw sewage into the waters because they claim they can't get the chemicals because of Brexit. It's been a long-standing issue. These companies are happy to dump raw sewage in the water and pocket massive amounts of profits rather than clearing up the water as much as possible before they export it. In July, Southern Waters was fined a record £90 million after it admitted to pumping billions of litres in raw sewage into the sea. So the key questions are, right, are they going to increase consumer price because they were fined? B, how much profit did they actually make from dumping the raw sewage into the sea? And see what's going to change now as a result of that. Are they still going to be able to do it? And it's going to take a decade or whatever to actually investigate it, because regulators don't have the funds and the abilities to properly investigate in quicker time. He goes, the author goes, I met Graham West on a bright morning in October 21. That week, a combined sewer overflow CSO near the beach at Whitstable had released polluted water into the sea, which means West can't pump seawater into the purification tanks. So what we can read is like he's got a purification tank, even though they cost a lot of money. But this guy, he couldn't use the seawater to purify the shellfish because of the amount of contamination within the seawater itself, which is ludicrous. So to show you that there are so many layers to these problems. He goes, the game is dead. He told me between Southern Water and Brexit, it's killed this industry. He's been buying oysters from Jersey and Ireland for 4 years now. Now he acts as a middleman, selling oysters to restaurants and tough little whelks which live further out to export. So essentially, he stopped farming. He stopped, farming fish or fishing, whatever you want to call it, and he just works as a person who buys it probably in bulk or in large amounts and sells it to smaller end users. Really. The trouble is he never knows when they're going to pollute the sea. Southern Water CSO are permitted to release whenever there is heavy rainfall. The locals say they release more frequently, and that's where I think they need to give a justification to the regulator before they can start dumping the water into the ocean or into the waterways, purely because they can just say, oh, there was heavy rainfall even though it's been sunny all week. And then it takes the regulator ages to figure out, oh, was it actually sunny or not, evidently. So yeah, and you can see this dude's issue where he can't use the purification tanks at certain times because of the dumping of sewage water, and these fish have a short shelf life even before they are purified. As for West, it's impossible to predict which days he might be able to buy oysters. If he doesn't have the clean water to purify them, he can't sell them because they're a massive bacterial risk. James Green, the director of Whitstable Oyster Company, said since last September there have been about 2 weeks when we didn't have Whitstable oysters due to water quality not being enough to harvest. So it does show you the Tories are destroying the shellfish industry in two different ways here, via pollution and via Brexit. Ideally, he would like the water quality to be of high enough grade he could take his oysters straight out of the sea and sell them. So you're talking grade A waters, which the UK doesn't have a lot of. He said we're working around what isn't an ideal scenario. So, to kind of come back on his point, which is we don't have much in terms of grade A waters, despite the regulators trying to fiddle about with it because of all the pollution, right? So you have grade B and C waters, which means the oysters have to be purified, which before they can be consumed because of the E. coli and other bacteria. But the further problem they have is they can't use the seawater to purify the shellfish because of all the contamination in the seawater. So there's nothing they can really do here. 8 weeks before I met West, the author saying, he had to dump 4,500 oysters in a skip before they were recalled amid an outbreak of sickness in the area, which does show you that maybe he had used, I'm not blaming him or anyone else here, maybe they had used the seawater to purify the shellfish and maybe there was a bacterial outbreak and that caused this problem. I don't know, that's speculation on my part, but evidently something bad happened here in order for them to have to recall 4,500 oysters. But this is bigger than him, this is bigger than the future of his beloved town. You go to Margate for Dreamland, never been there. You go to Whitstable for the oysters, says West, and no one's clearly going Whitstable for the oysters if they're, oysters from Jersey or from Ireland. In days gone by, his boat would make a tour of the pots, which lie not far from the shore where the seabed is rocky and the lobsters roam looking for a new home. Every other day, each pot would have 15 to 20 lobsters in it, which is pretty decent by the sounds of it. Now, there's nothing there. We know for a fact that phosphates, nitrates, they create more algae bloom. I believe they're linked together. So his theory is that there are more chemicals and things, I think, in the water, which feeds into the algae, which causes them to grow more, which means that it impacts kind of the local wildlife or sea life, should we say, in terms of the lobsters and the shellfish. But again, I don't think he's been able to prove that. It's just a theory. I don't think there's anything more I really wanted to talk about in this article. It's quite a long one, to be honest. But yeah, you got 20 tons of mussels to Europe on a lorry that goes to a channel tunnel. That's an issue because I think the channel tunnel would have crashed. I'm not sure if it's around then. So we'll leave it here for this article. They do talk about more and more of the problems, but I cut it off here. But it goes to show you that the pollution was a much bigger problem than I initially had thought in Britain. But Brexit is also killing off the industry because even if as long as I think the waters were Category B, I don't know if the EU had accepted a Category C shellfish, but even if they were just Category B shellfish, the other EU member states would have happily accepted them and purified them there and sold them on. But because of Brexit, that privilege doesn't exist anymore. That they had to be purified before they are sold into the EU, which means they're essentially DOA before they can be sold. And if you have a paperwork issue, then you're Dunsky. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Or I did want to say, actually, I did check out the MP for Whitstable, and it's not a Tory MP, it's actually Rosie Duffield, because I was going to say for dude, maybe he should email his local MP, but Rosie Duffield is too busy fighting nonsensical battles with trans people rather than evidently fighting for her constituency, because I've not heard her mention this at all. It's an easy win for Labour, yet she's too busy fighting other battles and being buddy with Nadine Dorries. So maybe it's time Rosie Duffield actually talks to her constituents about the issues they're facing, or rather than facing an imaginary culture war. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.